A sealed tomb is never just a room beneath the earth. It is a warning, a memory, and sometimes a threat carved for strangers who are never meant to enter. Across ancient Egypt and beyond, kings filled their graves with gold, prayers, and curses, hoping to defeat time itself. But every open tomb asks the same haunting question: are we discovering the past, or disturbing it? Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. If this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, the first thing that reaches the tomb is not light, but breath. It moves ahead of the men at the entrance, warm and human, vanishing into a blackness that has not opened for centuries. Dust hangs there as if it has been waiting for this exact disturbance, rising in soft veils from the sealed stone, from the cracked plaster, from the floor where no living foot has pressed since the last hands withdrew and the doorway was closed. Beyond the threshold, the air is ancient in a way no object can be. It has rested beside the dead. It has touched painted walls, funerary jars, linen, gold, bone, wood, resin, and silence. And as the first narrow beam enters, sliding over symbols whose meanings are only partly understood, the old human feeling returns with surprising force. Some places are not merely hidden. Some places feel forbidden. This is where the curse begins, not with thunder, not with a screaming apparition, not with some sudden hand reaching out from the dark, but with a boundary. One side belongs to the living, to hunger, sunlight, ambition, scholarship, greed, and curiosity. The other side belongs to those who are meant to remain undisturbed. Every ancient tomb carries that tension. It is a room built by the living for the dead, yet it is also a message sent forward to strangers. Do not forget me. Do not steal from me. Do not erase my name. Do not cross without consequence. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, because the story behind ancient tomb curses is not simply a tale of superstition. It is a story about fear, power, grief, and the dangerous human desire to make death obey. Long before modern archaeologists lift a brush over painted plaster or photograph a burial chamber under electric lamps, ancient people already understand that tombs are vulnerable. The dead cannot guard their own houses in the ordinary way. Their hands are folded, their eyes are closed, their bodies are wrapped, burned, buried, arranged, or sealed according to the customs of their time. Yet around them gather the things that tempt the living most: gold, jewellery, weapons, food offerings, fine cloth, carved furniture, seals, amulets, statues, vessels, and sometimes secrets. A tomb is meant to be permanent, but it sits in a world that is not. Dynasties fall, floods come, sand shifts, villages move, priests die, gods accept bribes, sons forget fathers, empires collapse into dust, and new people walk over old cemeteries without knowing whose names lie beneath their feet. So the tomb becomes more than a burial. It becomes a fortress of meaning. Stones are fitted tightly, passages are disguised, shafts are filled with rubble, doors are plastered and stamped, images stare from the walls, names are carved again and again, because in many ancient cultures to erase a name is to wound the dead a second time, and sometimes, near the entrance or deeper inside, words appear that are not prayers exactly, and not simple warnings either. They are threats wrapped in sacred language. They promise disease, divine judgment, loss of office, the anger of gods, the destruction of family lines, the denial of burial, or a fate so vague that imagination makes it worse. The evidence remains incomplete, and not every tomb contains such warnings, but where they survive, they reveal something essential. Ancient people did not think the dead were powerless. They believed the boundary between worlds could still be defended. That belief is not limited to one civilization. It rises in different landscapes, under different skies, in desert necropolises, river valleys, mountain tombs, royal mounds, temple burials, and family graves. In Egypt, where the dry sand preserves bodies with uncanny intimacy, the tomb can become a machine for eternity. In Mesopotamia, where kings and priests speak through clay tablets and temple foundations, curses can be written with bureaucratic precision and divine severity. In the Greek and Roman worlds, grave markers warn passers-by not to disturb bones or steal land from the dead. In China, vast underground worlds are constructed for rulers who intend to continue their authority beneath the earth. Across cultures, the details change, but the anxiety remains recognizable. The dead have property, the dead have dignity, the living are not always trustworthy. And yet, from the beginning, the warning itself admits a terrible truth. If no one were tempted to break in, no curse would be needed. The words exist because the builders know human nature too well. A sealed chamber can inspire reverence, but it can also inspire calculation. Someone will wonder what lies behind the door. Someone will measure the value of a necklace against the risk of invisible punishment. Someone will hear that a king went into the afterlife surrounded by wealth and decide that the king has had it long enough. Tomb robbery is not a modern crime against archaeology. It is almost as old as tomb building itself. Many royal burials were violated within decades, sometimes within years, perhaps even by people who knew the burial arrangements firsthand. What survives in the record suggests a world where sacred fear and practical greed stand face to face in the dark. Modern imagination often treats ancient curses as if they belong to horror stories, but for the people who made them, they were part of a serious moral universe. The tomb was not just a container for a corpse, it was a point of contact between family, gods, ancestors, land, and memory. To violate it was not simply to take objects, it was to disrupt order. It was to insult the dead and perhaps endanger the living community that depended on proper relations with the unseen. Scholars still debate how literally every person understood these threats, and belief must have varied from one individual to another, as it always does. A priest reciting the formula may have felt its sacred force. A hungry labourer may have feared it but gone in anyway. A ruler commissioning the inscription may have understood both its religious meaning and its political usefulness. No single explanation fully accounts for this, because curses live in the space where faith, law, fear, and power overlap. There is also something strangely intimate about the whole idea. A curse is an act of imagination aimed at the future. The person who orders it carved knows that strangers may come later, people with different clothing, different gods, different languages, different reasons for entering. The curse tries to reach them anyway. It says that time does not cancel obligation. It says that distance does not excuse desecration. It says that the dead still have a claim. Even when the language can no longer be read, the posture remains legible: a sealed door, a warning, a chamber prepared for eternity, and the uneasy feeling that the living are intruding on a promise made long ago. That is why the opening of a tomb can feel so charged even in a scientific age. Modern archaeology brings notebooks, conservation plans, cameras, gloves, permits, and careful methods, but it cannot fully erase the emotional force of the threshold. The first glimpse into a burial chamber is never only an inspection of objects. It is a confrontation with survival and failure at the same time. The tomb has survived because it was hidden, sealed, forgotten, feared, or lucky. but it has also failed. In a sense, because the living have arrived. The silence is broken. The darkness is measured. The dead are about to become evidence. And somewhere inside that moment, between awe and trespass, the ancient curse finds its power again. Whether or not any supernatural force waits in the dust, the warning still works on the mind. It slows the hand. It sharpens the breath. It reminds the intruder that knowledge has a cost, and that immortality, when built in stone, is never peaceful. It must be defended against weather, thieves, empires, scholars, museums, and time itself. The curse of ancient tombs begins with that impossible bargain: the living build a house for eternity, then pray that no future living soul will want to enter it. The tomb becomes powerful because death, in the ancient world, is rarely treated as a simple ending. It is a change of address, a passage into danger, a transformation that must be managed with care. A body is not merely disposed of and forgotten. It is washed, wrapped, burned, painted, perfumed, folded, seated, extended, supplied, hidden, displayed, mourned, and remembered according to rules that can be as strict as any law of the living, in the earliest graves, long before the great pyramids or royal mausoleums. The signs are already there: beads laid near a skull, tools placed beside a hand, red ochre scattered over bones, animal remains arranged with purpose, shells carried from far away and buried with someone who will never walk again. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the exact meanings of some prehistoric burials. But even the simplest grave can suggest a thought that refuses to disappear. The dead may need something. The dead may go somewhere. The dead may still matter. From that idea grows one of humanity's most extraordinary inventions: the tomb as an eternal house. Not a pit, not a hiding place, not only a memorial, but a built environment for a person who has crossed beyond ordinary reach. The tomb offers walls against decay, ritual against forgetting, objects against need, and images against silence. It is architecture designed for someone who no longer breathes, yet whose social presence continues. A ruler in life remains a ruler in death. A noble remains noble. A child remains beloved. An ancestor remains dangerous or protective depending on how the living behave. The dead may not speak in the marketplace, but they still occupy land, memory, family duty, and sacred imagination. This is why so many ancient tombs imitate the world above ground. The dead are given food because hunger is imaginable even beyond death. They are given vessels because thirst and feasting remain part of human dignity. They are given jewelry because status must travel with them. They are given weapons because danger may continue in unseen country. They are given servants in image, model, inscription, or, in some societies, in the most literal and brutal way through human sacrifice. What survives in the record suggests that the afterlife was often pictured not as pure abstraction, but as a continuation of earthly order, improved, stabilized, and protected from the humiliations of decay. Eternity was not always imagined as a cloudless paradise. Sometimes it looked like a court, a farm, a banquet, a palace, a road, a field, a bureaucracy, or a kingdom beneath the earth. That kingdom required maintenance. Families returned with offerings. Priests recited names. Festivals reopened the link between the living house and the dead house. Tomb chapels, altars, and offering tables turned grief into routine. In many places, the survival of the dead depended on the attention of descendants. To be forgotten was not just sad. It could be spiritually catastrophic. A name spoken aloud could feed memory. A carved image could preserve identity when flesh failed. A painted scene of bread, beer, cattle, birds, and servants could become more than decoration. It could be a permanent supply, an endless table set in pigment and stone. To modern eyes, such scenes may look symbolic, but for the people who commissioned them, the boundary between representation and power was not always so clean. Images could work, words could act, a tomb could perform. The larger the power of the dead person, the larger the world built around them. Chiefs rise under mounds, kings lie beneath pyramids, emperors command underground armies. Nobles occupy chambers painted with gardens, rivers, musicians, hunts, feasts, boats, stars, and gods. The tomb becomes a compressed universe, a miniature order where everything necessary is placed in relation to the dead. Even the location matters. Burial near ancestors strengthens lineage. Burial near a sacred place brings divine nearness. Burial in a hidden valley protects the body from thieves while placing it inside a landscape already heavy with meaning. Burial beneath a monument declares that the ruler's body is not merely a body, but the centre of a political and cosmic statement. There is a hard truth beneath this beauty. Tombs also reveal inequality with unusual clarity. The poor may receive a shallow grave, a mat, a pot, perhaps a few beads or tools, while rulers command thousands of workers, rare materials, imported stone, skilled artists, ritual specialists, and years of planning. Death may come to everyone, but immortality is never evenly funded. The grand tomb is a machine built from labour. It requires quarrymen, carpenters, painters, scribes, embalmers, guards, priests, administrators, farmers growing surplus food, and ordinary people whose names are rarely recorded. The dead king's eternity rests on the backs of the living. No single explanation fully accounts for why societies accepted such immense costs, but power, belief, fear, obligation, and hope all play their part. A royal tomb promises that order itself will continue. If the ruler reaches eternity safely, perhaps the kingdom remains stable. If the ancestors are honoured, perhaps the fields keep producing. If the sacred dead are protected, perhaps the living world does not unravel. This is where the tomb begins to resemble a kingdom in another sense. It has territory, wealth, servants, laws, guardians, and enemies. Its walls define a forbidden interior. Its inscriptions speak with authority. Its rituals collect offerings like taxes paid to memory. Its images preserve hierarchy. Even its silence becomes political. A sealed royal chamber tells the living that some power is too sacred to touch, even after breath has left the body. The dead ruler is absent, yet still commands space. And because the tomb is a kingdom, trespass becomes rebellion. A thief does not merely steal metal, he invades a world that was meant to remain intact forever. A later ruler who erases a predecessor's name does not simply edit stone. He attacks immortality. A conqueror who opens graves humiliates the past. Even an archaeologist, arriving with care rather than malice, enters a structure designed around the hope of non-entry. That contradiction will haunt the entire story of ancient tombs. The very things that make tombs precious to history were placed there because someone hoped they would never become history in the modern sense. They were meant to keep a person alive in the next world, not to satisfy curiosity in this one. So the ancient tomb stands at the centre of a deep human bargain. It promises that memory can be built, that identity can be protected, that the body can be sheltered, that death can be organised into something less chaotic. Yet every stone also admits fear. Without decay, there would be no need for preservation. Without forgetting, no need for names carved in walls. Without thieves, no need for hidden passages. Without doubt, perhaps no need for curses. The kingdom of the dead is grand because death is terrifying, and because the living, facing that terror, choose to build. Once the tomb becomes a house for eternity, it needs a door that is more than a door. Stone can block a passage, mud brick can seal a shaft, rubble can fill a corridor, but none of these is enough against the oldest weakness in the design. The living know how to move stone. They know how to dig, pry, wait, bribe, remember, and return by night. So ancient people begin to protect the dead with another material, one lighter than limestone and sometimes more durable than bronze. They use language. A warning carved near a burial is not only information, it is an attempt to make fear permanent. It turns the entrance into a moral border, and it tells anyone who approaches that the danger ahead is not limited to falling blocks, hidden pits, or angry descendants. The danger may come from the gods, from the dead, from the earth itself, or from a world of powers that cannot be seen until it is too late. The earliest protective language around graves is difficult to trace, because so much of it must have vanished with wood, cloth, spoken ritual, painted plaster, and memory. The evidence remains incomplete. Many prehistoric graves have no writing at all, because writing has not yet been invented, or because the people who buried their dead used marks, gestures, songs, and offerings instead of texts. Yet even without written curses, protection is visible in arrangement. Stones are laid over bodies, heavy slabs cover chambers. Grave goods are placed with care. Bodies are sometimes oriented in repeated directions, as if the grave follows a rule shared by the community. In some places, burials are separated from daily settlement space. In others, the dead lie beneath houses, close enough to remain part of family life. These choices do not all mean the same thing, and scholars still debate what many of them signify. But they show that burial space is never ordinary ground. It is marked, controlled, and made different. Before curses are written, boundaries are performed. A funeral procession moves the dead from one state to another. A grave is opened, filled, closed, and remembered. Offerings are deposited. Earth is pressed down. Perhaps words are spoken that no archaeologist will ever recover. Perhaps hands are washed afterward. Perhaps mourners avoid the place for a time, or return only on certain days. The protection of the dead begins in ritual behaviour, and ritual behaviour teaches the living where they may stand, when they may approach, and what they must not do. A curse inscription later fixes this boundary in visible form, but the idea behind it is older than writing. The dead are not abandoned objects. They are surrounded by rules. When writing does enter the world of burial, it changes the tomb's defences. A spoken warning dies with the speaker unless repeated. A carved warning waits. It can address a future thief, a careless passer-by, a rival family, a corrupt official, or a stranger from a distant age. It can summon named gods as witnesses. It can threaten specific punishments. It can declare ownership. It can turn a tomb into a legal document and a sacred trap at the same time. In Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, the Levant, Greece, and Rome, protective formulas appear in different languages and traditions, but many share the same basic anxiety someone may disturb what must remain whole. The words often do not sound like the vague ghost stories later generations imagine. They can be precise, almost administrative. They threaten the violator with loss of property, loss of heirs, loss of burial, loss of divine favour, or exclusion from the community of the blessed dead. In some traditions, the punishment is cosmic. In others, it is painfully practical. A man who steals from a grave may have no son to pour offerings for him. A person who damages an inscription may have his own name erased. A violator may be denied rest, which is one of the cruelest penalties a tomb culture can imagine. What survives in the record suggests that these curses speak directly to the fears of their societies. They do not merely say, "You will suffer." They say, "You will lose the very immortality you're trying to steal from another." Images become part of this first language of protection as well. A painted guardian, a carved demon, a watchful animal, a protective deity, a pair of staring eyes, a serpent, a jackal, a winged figure, or a weapon-bearing spirit can transform a wall into a sentinel. To modern viewers, such figures may seem decorative or symbolic, but in many ancient systems, an image has force. It is not only a representation of protection, it participates in protection. A guardian painted beside a passage stands there in the imagination of the culture that made it. A spell written beside a dangerous gate helps the dead pass safely while warning the unprepared living away. A false door in an Egyptian tomb is not a simple architectural joke. It is a threshold through which the spirit may receive offerings, a controlled opening between realms. The tomb is filled with surfaces that seem still, yet are meant to act. There is a lesser-known irony in many protective systems. The same writing that defends the tomb also reveals how to think about it. A curse tells the thief what the owner fears. A guardian image shows which powers are trusted. A sealed doorway announces that something valuable lies beyond. Protection can become advertisement. Hidden tombs are safer when forgotten, but elite tombs often need to be remembered, visited, named, and supplied. This creates a contradiction at the heart of ancient burial. The dead require visibility for memory and invisibility for safety. Too much display invites robbery. Too much concealment risks oblivion. No single explanation fully accounts for how each society balanced that tension. But the tomb itself often becomes the compromise, a chapel or marker accessible to the living, a chamber hidden deeper inside for the body and its treasures, and between them a zone of ritual control. The curse belongs to that zone. It speaks from the edge between permission and violation. Family members, priests, and legitimate visitors may approach with offerings, prayers, and proper conduct. The thief crosses differently. He enters without respect, without ritual, without the right words, without care for the name of the dead. The curse is aimed at that difference. It does not always forbid all contact with the tomb. It forbids the wrong kind of contact, the kind that turns remembrance into consumption. Over time, these protective languages grow more elaborate. They draw from law, religion, magic, kingship, family duty, and local tradition. They can be carved in stone, painted on walls, written on coffins, sealed into foundations, placed on boundary markers, or embedded in funerary texts intended to guide the dead through the afterlife. Some are public and confrontational, others are hidden, meant less for human eyes than for divine enforcement. Together they show that ancient protection is never only physical. The tomb is guarded by architecture, but also by expectation. It is guarded by the fear of shame, the fear of gods, the fear of ancestors, the fear of becoming a restless dead person oneself. And as the centuries pass, this first language of protection leaves behind something more enduring than the fear it once created. It lets the modern world hear ancient people thinking ahead, across ruined cemeteries and opened chambers. Their warnings still reach outward, damaged but recognizable. They do not prove that curses kill. They prove that the dead were believed to have rights, that memory required defense, and that the living were dangerous enough to be threatened from beyond the grave. In Egypt, the tomb becomes a place where the human fear of vanishing is turned into a system of astonishing detail. The desert helps, but the desert alone does not explain it. Long before kings command pyramids and painters cover burial chambers with stars, the dry sand of the Nile Valley sometimes preserves bodies naturally, drawing moisture from flesh until the dead seem to linger in a form that is neither fully present nor fully gone. To people living beside the river, where black soil floods, dries, and renews itself each year, this preservation must have carried a strange lesson. The body can decay, but it can also endure. Nature itself appears to offer a hint that death may be managed, delayed, perhaps even transformed. What survives in the record suggests that Egyptian burial beliefs grow from many roots at once: landscape, kingship, family devotion, temple ritual, observation of decay, and a profound confidence that the cosmos has order if the right acts are performed. That order is the key. Egyptian immortality is not simply a wish to live forever. It is a technical problem, a sacred journey, and a moral challenge. The dead person must be preserved, named, supplied, protected, justified, and guided. The body matters because it remains a necessary anchor for identity. The name matters because to lose the name is to slide toward non-existence. The tomb matters because it houses the body and receives offerings. The images matter because they can keep life's necessities available in permanent form. The spells matter because the afterlife is not empty space but a landscape of gates, judges, dangers, divine beings, and tests. No single explanation fully accounts for the development of Egyptian funerary practice across thousands of years, because Egypt itself changes repeatedly. Yet the long continuity is striking. Again and again, the Egyptians return to the same central ambition: to make the dead capable of lasting. Mummification is the most famous expression of that ambition, but it is often misunderstood when treated as a grim obsession with corpses. At its heart, it is an act of repair. Death damages the body's unity. Embalming attempts to restore it, stabilize it, and prepare it for a different mode of existence. Internal organs are removed or treated because decay must be slowed. Natron dries the flesh. Resin, oils, linen, amulets, masks, and careful wrapping transform the vulnerable body into a ritual object. The result is not meant to look merely sleeping. It is meant to be effective. A mummy is a body remade for eternity, and the skill involved can be extraordinary. The best embalmers understand anatomy through practice, even if their explanations differ from modern medicine. They know what rots quickly, what must be removed, what must be packed, what must be sealed, and how scent, dryness, and wrapping can hold destruction at bay. Around that preserved body, the tomb becomes a second body of stone. Its chambers shelter what linen shelters more closely. Its walls speak what the mouth can no longer say. In Old Kingdom royal burials, the pyramid texts appear inside the pyramids of kings and later queens, giving the dead ruler words of ascent, transformation, and divine association. Later, coffin. Texts extend powerful afterlife knowledge beyond royal circles, and still later. Funerary compositions known broadly as the Book of the Dead appear on papyri and tomb walls, offering spells for passage through the dangers beyond death. The evidence remains incomplete, and these texts vary across time and status, but they show that immortality is not passive. The dead must know how to move, answer, breathe, eat, avoid traps, satisfy divine powers, and emerge vindicated. The scene of judgment becomes one of Egypt's most enduring images. The heart, seat of thought, feeling, and moral record, is weighed against the feather of Mat, the principle of truth, balance, and cosmic order. If the heart is too heavy with wrongdoing, the dead face annihilation, often represented by the terrifying devourer who waits nearby. This is not merely punishment in a narrow sense, it is the failure to join order. Immortality depends on being aligned with the structure of the universe. Scholars still debate how ordinary Egyptians understood the relationship between ritual preparation and moral judgment, and belief surely varied by period and person, but the ideal is clear enough. One does not simply buy eternity with a decorated coffin. One must be made whole, remembered, ritually equipped, and justified. Yet wealth undeniably matters. The poor cannot commission walls crowded with painted offerings or coffins layered with texts. They cannot always afford elaborate embalming, imported materials, or carved statues. Some receive modest burials that still show care, while others vanish almost entirely from the archaeological record. Egyptian immortality may be imagined as a cosmic possibility, but access to its most elaborate protections is shaped by rank. This tension gives Egyptian tombs their haunting double nature. They are spiritual instruments, but also displays of inequality. A king's burial can mobilize a state. A noble's tomb can preserve fine details of estate life, hunting, music, craft, and family pride. A labourer's grave may leave only a few objects and bones, yet the same human desire is present in smaller form. Let this person not be nothing. The hidden chamber develops because Egyptian tombs must defend both body and equipment. Mastabas, pyramids, rock-cut tombs, shafts, blocking stones, false passages, and concealed entrances all reflect the same practical problem. The dead need goods, but goods attract thieves. The dead need a name, but visibility attracts attention. In the Valley of the Kings, royal tombs cut deep into limestone cliffs, often with corridors descending into painted darkness. The walls do not only impress visitors. Many were not meant for casual visitors at all. They surround the king with sacred knowledge, solar journeys, underworld maps, divine encounters, and protective beings. The burial chamber becomes a cosmic chamber. The ceiling may bloom with stars. The king lies in the earth and travels with the sun. This is where Egyptian curses occupy a complex place. Popular imagination often assumes every Egyptian tomb carries a dramatic death sentence against intruders, but the reality is more uneven and more interesting. Many tombs do not contain the sort of curse later fiction expects. Some inscriptions focus on offerings, identity, prayers, and the proper conduct of visitors. Others do include threats against those who damage the tomb, steal from it, or fail to respect the dead. Tomb owners may warn that the violator will be judged by great gods, lose status, or suffer spiritually. The threat is real within the belief system, but it is not always written like a horror story. It is often formal, legalistic, religious, and deeply tied to the defense of memory. The surprising detail is that Egyptian tomb protection is not built only against strangers. It also guards against time, neglect, and administrative failure. Priests who are supposed to maintain cult offerings may stop. Families may die out. Political chaos may interrupt rituals. Later builders may reuse stone. Names may be chiseled away by enemies. Robbers may enter through cracks known only to workmen. Even royal mummies, despite all their sacred preparation, are sometimes moved in antiquity by priests trying to save them from destruction. Some kings who expected eternal privacy end up hidden together in caches, stripped of much of their original splendor but preserved from worse violation. Immortality survives through improvisation, not perfection. Egypt perfects the dream of the tomb more fully than almost any ancient culture, yet even there the dream remains fragile. The body can be dried, wrapped, masked, named, and surrounded by gods. The walls can be painted with rivers of the underworld and fields of eternal grain. The doorway can be sealed. The curse can threaten anyone who enters wrongly. But the desert is patient, and so are the living. Eventually a hand reaches the stone, a lamp enters the passage, and the House of Eternity becomes a discovery. Egypt's genius is that even when its tombs fail to remain closed, they still succeed in another way. They make the dead astonishingly difficult to forget. The first great enemy of the ancient tomb is not the modern archaeologist, and not the foreign collector, and not even the museum glass case waiting in some distant capital. The first enemy is usually someone much closer, a worker who remembers where the corridor bends, a guard who knows when the watch changes, a priest who understands which seals matter and which can be replaced, a local official willing to look away, a desperate man who has heard that gold lies behind a wall of limestone and that the dead cannot call for help in any language the living are forced to obey. Tomb robbery begins almost as soon as tomb wealth becomes worth stealing. The sacred dark is entered not by people who have forgotten the gods, but by people who often live inside the same world of belief as the tomb builders. That is the unsettling part. The curse does not fail because nobody believes in it. It is tested because hunger, ambition, debt, corruption, and opportunity can become stronger than fear. In Egypt, the evidence for ancient tomb robbery is especially vivid because the burial culture is so rich and the records sometimes preserve the aftermath. Broken blocking stones, smashed coffins, scattered bones, missing jewellery, pried open sarcophagi, and tunnels cut through walls all tell the same story in different ways. A royal tomb might be designed with hidden chambers and descending corridors, but no design is perfect when the people who build it understand its plan. A noble might commission warnings and protective spells, yet the thieves may know exactly where the valuables are likely to rest around the neck, between the wrappings, inside coffins, near the chest, among the canopic equipment, beneath amulets placed close to the flesh. What survives in the record suggests that robbers were often practical, hurried, and selective. They did not always destroy everything out of hatred. They broke what stood between them and portable value. Gold could be melted. Jewellery could be reset. Fine vessels could be sold. Linen could be reused. Even the sacred body could become, in their hands, an obstacle to be searched. The violation is sometimes shockingly physical. Mummies are unwrapped, bent, torn apart, or burned to extract amulets and precious materials. Coffin faces are damaged. Names are ignored unless erasing them helps disguise ownership. Heavy objects may be left behind because they are too difficult to move. Small treasures disappear because they can pass through markets, workshops, and households more easily. Tomb robbery is not only a dramatic midnight break-in, it is an economy. Stolen goods need buyers, metal needs melting, officials need bribing, guards need silence. The act in the chamber is only one point in a larger chain of human compromise. Scholars still debate the exact organisation of some robbery networks, but the surviving clues make clear that many violations were not random acts by lone thieves. Some required knowledge, coordination, and protection from above. One of the most revealing windows into this world comes from ancient investigations themselves. Egyptian records from periods of instability describe inquiries into tomb robberies, accusations, interrogations, and punishments. These documents do not read like ghost stories. They read like a society trying to defend sacred property with earthly administration. Men are questioned. Confessions are recorded. Officials inspect damaged tombs. The language can be formal, but behind it is a scene of enormous anxiety. The houses of eternity are being opened by the living, and the state must prove that it can still protect the dead. A lesser-known detail is that some ancient trials suggest not only theft by outsiders, but possible involvement by people connected to the necropolis system itself. The very institutions created to maintain royal memory could become entangled in its destruction. This is not surprising when the wider world begins to strain. Tombs are most vulnerable when authority weakens. During times of political fragmentation, economic pressure, famine, war, or administrative decay, the distance between sacred prohibition and practical survival narrows. A man who would never touch a grave in a stable year may think differently when grain is scarce, wages fail, or officials themselves are stealing. No single explanation fully accounts for every robbery. Because motives vary, some thieves are greedy, some are poor, some are professionals, some are opportunists. Some may still fear divine punishment and perform small rituals to calm that fear. Others may convince themselves that the dead no longer need so much wealth. The tomb is sacred, but it is also full of metal in a world where metal has value. The curse, then, becomes part of a negotiation inside the thief's mind. It may delay him, frighten him, or force him to act secretly, but it does not always stop him. This does not mean the curse is meaningless. A locked door is not meaningless because locks can be picked. A law is not meaningless because crimes occur. Curses belong to a layered defense system, joined with architecture, guards, secrecy, custom, shame, and punishment. Their purpose is not necessarily to make violation impossible. It is to raise the cost of violation, to surround the act with dread, and to declare that the dead have allies beyond the reach of ordinary law. Yet the robbers also expose a contradiction within elite burial itself. The more splendid the tomb, the greater the temptation. A poor grave may be ignored because it promises little. A royal burial announces that wealth has been removed from circulation and sealed with a body. Even when hidden, rumour can preserve its location. Even when stripped, stories of a lost treasure may cling to the landscape for generations. The builders hope that ore will protect the tomb, but ore can sharpen desire. Gold made for eternity can become gold for the market. Sacred objects can become raw material. The dead king's afterlife can be dismantled one bracelet at a time. And still, ancient robbers are not always the final destroyers. Sometimes their damage creates strange forms of survival. A tomb already plundered may be ignored by later thieves, leaving paintings, fragments, bones, and overlooked objects behind. A mummy moved by priests to protect it from robbers may survive in a hidden cache far from its original chamber. A broken burial can preserve evidence of the robbery itself, allowing modern scholars to reconstruct not only funerary belief, but crime. Policing, corruption, and fear in the ancient world. The violation becomes part of the archaeological record. The thief, trying to erase value from the tomb, leaves his own shadow there. The sacred dark, then, is never as still as the builders hoped. It is visited by priests with offerings, mourners with grief, officials with seals, thieves with tools, and centuries later, archaeologists with lamps. Each arrival changes the tomb. Each one proves that eternity is not a single sealed moment, but a long struggle against human intrusion. The curse waits in that struggle, carved or spoken or imagined, warning the robber that the dead are not defenseless. But the robber steps forward anyway, and in that step the ancient world reveals one of its hardest truths. People feared the gods, but they also feared hunger, poverty, and powerlessness. And sometimes the treasure in the dark seemed more immediate than the punishment beyond it. When a curse is carved into stone, it does more than frighten thieves. It announces authority. It says that the tomb is not an abandoned hole in the earth, not a forgotten storage room of valuables, not a tempting accident of wealth and darkness, but a protected domain under the care of powers greater than any living intruder. Kings understand this. Priests understand it even better. A tomb curse is never only a scream from the dead. It is also a form of law, written in sacred language. Placed where ordinary law becomes weak, once the funeral procession leaves, once the guards change, once the family line thins, once the official records decay or are lost, who will defend the sealed chamber? The answer, in many ancient societies, is that the gods will, the ancestors will, the dead owner will. The curse turns invisible enforcement into political force. This is why the language of punishment around tombs often sounds so severe. The threat may not stop at the individual who breaks in. It may reach his children, his household, his memory, his body after death, his ability to receive offerings, or his place among the honoured dead. To a modern ear, this can sound excessive, but in a world where family continuity and proper burial are central to identity, such punishments strike at the deepest fears. A thief might survive a night in the tomb, but what if his name fails after him? What if no son remembers him? What if his own grave is disturbed? What if the order he violated returns against him in the same form? The curse works by making desecration feel contagious. To harm the dead is to endanger one's own dead future. For kings, this logic is especially useful. Royal power always depends on more than soldiers and taxes. It needs imagination. It needs people to believe that the ruler stands near the gods, that the dynasty is part of cosmic order, that rebellion is not merely illegal but unnatural. The royal tomb extends that claim beyond death. It says that the king remains significant even when his body is hidden. He may no longer sit on a throne beneath the sun, but his burial chamber becomes another throne room, guarded by ritual, secrecy, and dread. A curse against violating that space protects more than jewellery. It protects the idea that kingship does not end in weakness. Even dead, the ruler must not appear helpless. Priests become essential in this arrangement because they control the language of danger. They know the formulas, the divine names, the rituals, the proper offerings, the calendar of remembrance, the ways to purify a space, and the words that separate permitted contact from violation. Their authority is not simply decorative. In many societies, priests and ritual specialists are the technicians of the sacred boundary. They can maintain the dead, feed the dead through offerings, interpret omens, and declare what angers the gods. What survives in the record suggests that tomb protection often depends on this ritual expertise as much as on stone doors or armed guards. A chamber may be sealed physically once, but it must be defended symbolically for generations. This creates a powerful social system. The living community is taught that tombs are not neutral property. They belong to a moral order. A person who steals from the dead is not clever. He is polluted, impious, dangerous. He threatens not only one burial, but the relationship between the living, the ancestors, and the gods. Such beliefs can protect elite tombs, but they also shape ordinary behaviour around cemeteries. People learn to step carefully, to offer respect, to fear certain places after dark, to leave grave goods untouched even when no guard is watching. Scholars still debate how far fear alone restrained robbery, especially in times of crisis. But the social effect of these beliefs is hard to dismiss. A curse makes the tomb public even when it is hidden, because everyone knows the kind of consequence that may follow. There is a lesser-known practical side to this. In some ancient inscriptions, the curse does not only invoke supernatural punishment, it also resembles a legal claim. It identifies the owner, defines the violation, calls witnesses, and states penalties. Sacred and legal language overlap. This is not accidental. Ancient law often depends on gods as guarantors, especially where human enforcement has limits. Boundary stones in Mesopotamia, for example, could call down divine punishment on anyone who moved them or altered the land grant they recorded. Foundation inscriptions could threaten later rulers who damaged a temple or erased a king's name. Tomb curses belong to this broader world of protected inscriptions. They are part warning, part contract, part prayer, part weapon. The fear of name erasure shows how closely punishment and memory are joined. In Egypt, to preserve a name is to preserve a person's continuing existence in some meaningful sense. To destroy a name can be an attack on eternity itself. That is why some rulers deliberately chisel away the names and images of predecessors or rivals. This practice, often called damnatio memoriae in later Roman contexts, appears in different forms across the ancient world. It is not the same as tomb robbery, but it shares the same battlefield memory. The curse threatens the violator with the very fate he inflicts. Damage my name, and your name may not endure. Break my house of eternity, and your own resting place may become vulnerable. Yet the system is never perfectly clean. Priests can protect tombs, but priesthoods can also benefit from tomb wealth, temple property, and political favour. Kings can invoke divine justice, while also using sacred fear to defend inequality. Officials can punish robbers harshly, but corruption may reach into the institutions meant to prevent robbery. No single explanation fully accounts for how sincere belief, political control, and economic interest blend together in tomb curses. They are religious texts, but they are also tools of power. They express genuine fear for the dead, but they also defend privilege. They warn against sacrilege, but they also help keep wealth sealed around elites whose labourers may have lived with far less. That tension does not make the curse less real in its own world. It makes it more revealing. The curse shows how ancient societies imagine enforcement when ordinary enforcement failed. It shows how power tries to survive the body. It shows how priests turn words into walls, and how kings turn burial into command. It shows that punishment in the ancient tomb is not only about revenge, it is about maintaining order across the most unstable border humans know. The border between the living and the dead. So when the thief enters, he's not simply crawling through stone. He's crossing a system built to define him as wrong before he even touches the treasure. The curse names him in advance. The gods are summoned before he arrives. The dead have already accused him, and whether he believes completely, partly, or not at all, the tomb has placed him inside a story of punishment. That story is the true guard at the door, and for centuries it remains one of the strongest defences the dead can possess. By the early 20th century, the Valley of the Kings already feels exhausted. The cliffs west of the Nile have been searched, mapped, entered, emptied, and argued over by generations of explorers, antiquities officials, local workers, collectors, scholars, and treasure hunters with varying degrees of patience and restraint. The valley does not look like a place still keeping a royal secret. It is dry, harsh, and exposed. A broken theatre of limestone where the sun presses down on the rock and the wind carries dust through gullies that once hid the ambitions of pharaohs. Many tombs are known. Many have been robbed since antiquity. Some have been damaged by floodwater, reused, stripped, studied, or reduced to corridors of absence. The age of spectacular discovery seems, to many observers, nearly finished. Yet beneath the rubble of ancient workmen's huts, under debris that had protected rather than advertised what lay below, a small step appears in 1922. It is not grand at first. It is only a cut in the earth, a hint of a staircase descending into the hidden part of history. Howard Carter, working with the financial backing of Lord Carnarvon, has spent years searching for the burial of a little-known king whose name appears in scattered traces, but whose tomb has not been securely identified. Tutankhamun is not remembered as one of Egypt's greatest rulers. He is young, shadowed by the religious upheaval of the Amarna period, connected to a dynasty recovering from disruption. In life, he likely holds less power over history than famous warrior kings and monument builders. In death, he's about to become the most recognizable pharaoh on earth. The sealed doorway is the moment when archaeology begins to turn into legend. Stamps on the plaster suggest royal authority. The passage beyond is filled. Another sealed door waits deeper in. The signs are confusing because there is evidence of ancient intrusion and resealing. The tomb has not been perfectly untouched, and scholars still debate some details of the early robberies and restorations. But compared with the devastated royal burials known from elsewhere in the valley, this one is astonishingly intact. The important fact is not that no one had ever entered. The important fact is that so much remains. In a valley famous for emptiness, Carter has found a chamber still crowded with the material world of a pharaoh's afterlife. When a small opening is made and a candle is held near the breach, the air inside seems to tremble with possibility. Shapes gradually emerge from the dark gilded couches with animal forms, dismantled chariots, boxes, jars, statues, beds, chairs, ritual objects, and surfaces flashing gold in the weak light. The famous moment is often retold as if it belongs to myth, but its power comes from the collision of ordinary action and extraordinary survival. A man looks through a hole in a sealed door. His eyes adjust. The ancient dead, prepared for eternity, become visible to the modern world. What survives in the record suggests that the chamber was not arranged like a museum display, but densely packed, almost compressed, as though the equipment of kingship, childhood, ritual, travel, hunting, ceremony, and daily life had been pushed into the available space around a royal body that still lay deeper within. Tutankhamun's tomb is not the largest royal tomb. It is not the most architecturally ambitious. In some ways, its modest scale may have helped preserve it. A young king's burial, prepared under pressure, placed in a smaller tomb perhaps not originally intended for him, could disappear more easily beneath later activity. This lesser-known possibility gives the discovery a quiet irony. Tutankhamun becomes world-famous partly because he was not buried like the most powerful pharaohs. His relative obscurity helped hide him. The king who might have been a footnote becomes an emblem of ancient splendor because history overlooked him just long enough. The objects inside do more than glitter. They restore detail to a human life and a royal ideology. There are signs of a young ruler's body, his ailments still debated, his family background still studied through inscriptions, art, and genetic evidence that remains complex. There are walking sticks, suggesting either status, ceremony, physical need, or some combination of these. There are chariots that speak to royal display and mobility. There are nested coffins and shrines that reveal how carefully the king's body was protected at the center of layers of sacred material. There are amulets, guardian figures, weapons, games, food containers, clothing, and ritual equipment. The tomb is a treasury, but it is also a document written in objects. And yet, from the beginning, the discovery carries unease. The burial chamber is not simply entered, it is negotiated, recorded, cleared, stabilized, and slowly dismantled as an archaeological operation. Every object must be removed from the place where it was meant to remain forever. Every layer of protection must be opened in order to understand the next. The king's immortality system, built to preserve his body and identity, becomes the reason modern hands move toward him with increasing care and inevitability. Carter is not a robber in the ancient sense. He is not melting gold in secret or tearing linen for amulets. But the deeper contradiction remains. The tomb was designed around sacred closure. Archaeology requires opening. That contradiction gives the later curse story fertile ground. Even before any famous death occurs, the emotional ingredients are present: a sealed royal tomb, a young pharaoh, golden treasures, ancient warnings, mysterious air, the drama of forbidden entry, and a public already fascinated by Egypt. The world after the First World War is hungry for marvels and haunted by death on an industrial scale. Egypt offers both beauty and the older, more intimate presence of mortality. Newspapers understand the appeal immediately. A hidden king has returned, and the modern age, for all its machines and electric lights, still knows how to feel a shiver before a sealed door. Lord Carnarvon's death in 1923 gives that shiver a focus. He dies months after the tomb's opening, reportedly after an infected mosquito bite leads to severe illness. Medically, the event belongs to the ordinary dangers of infection before modern antibiotics are widely available. Symbolically, it becomes something else. A wealthy patron enters the story of a dead king and soon dies. For rumour, that is enough. The evidence remains incomplete for any supernatural claim, and no careful accounting supports the idea that those connected with the tomb died at unusual rates. But legends do not require statistical discipline. They require timing, atmosphere, repetition, and a public willing to connect the dots in the most dramatic possible order. Tutankhamun enters the modern world, then in two forms at once. One is archaeological, a rare royal burial that transforms knowledge of Egyptian funerary art, craft, kingship, and material culture. The other is mythic, a dead king imagined as reaching across 3,000 years to punish those who disturbed him. The first form depends on evidence, the second depends on fear. They grow together, tangled from the start, until the golden mask and the curse become almost inseparable in popular memory. The young king's tomb had been built to protect his passage into eternity. Instead, it opened a passage through which modern history, science, commerce, journalism, and superstition all rushed in at once. The curse becomes famous not because ancient Egypt suddenly speaks with one voice, but because the modern world learns how to repeat a frightening story faster than it can correct it. Tutankhamun's tomb is discovered at the perfect moment for legend. Newspapers are hungry for spectacle. Photography gives readers images that feel intimate and immediate. Telegraphs and wire services carry fragments across continents. Egyptomania is already spreading through fashion, jewellery, theatre, architecture, advertising and private collecting. The golden objects from the valley do not remain confined to scholarly reports. They enter drawing rooms, breakfast tables, cinema newsreels, and conversations among people who will never stand in the heat of Luxor. The tomb is no longer only a chamber in the rock. It becomes a stage, and every illness, accident, rumour, and coincidence near that stage begins to look like part of the same performance. The death of Lord Carnarvon gives the newspapers the pattern they need. A rich aristocrat finances the search for a pharaoh's tomb. The sealed chamber opens. Months later, he dies. The medical explanation is available, but the symbolic explanation is stronger, simpler, and easier to sell. An infected bite is ordinary. A dead king's revenge is unforgettable. Around this single death, other details begin to gather, some true, some distorted, some invented later and repeated until they feel old. Stories circulate about lights going out in Cairo, about a pet canary swallowed by a cobra, about mysterious warnings, about inscriptions that promise death to anyone who disturbs the king. The evidence for many of these details remains incomplete or weak, and some of the most famous curse phrases do not actually appear in Tutankhamun's tomb in the way popular accounts claim. But a legend does not need a clean foundation, it needs emotional architecture. That architecture is built from selection. Many people associated with the tomb do not die quickly. Howard Carter, the man most directly involved in entering, clearing, and studying the tomb, lives for many years after the discovery. Numerous workers, officials, photographers, scholars, and visitors connected to the project continue their lives without being struck down by supernatural punishment. Yet survival is quiet. Death is news. A curse story grows by counting the dramatic cases and forgetting the inconvenient ones. Someone who dies years later can be pulled into the pattern if the connection sounds close enough. Someone who lives into old age can be ignored. No single explanation fully accounts for why certain rumours endure, but the method is familiar coincidence becomes evidence when people already want a mystery. The press also understands the power of ancient silence. A sealed tomb cannot deny anything. Tutankhamun cannot speak in his own defence, and the Egyptian priests who prepared him are long gone. Into that silence, modern writers pour atmosphere. The mummy becomes watchful. The golden mask becomes not a funerary masterpiece, but a face of warning. The dark chamber becomes a trap waiting through centuries. Even responsible archaeological details can be made to sound sinister if placed in the right order-sealed air. Sacred objects, guardian statues, broken doors, ritual texts, a young king's body, a dead patron. What survives in the record suggests a complicated excavation under difficult conditions, but popular storytelling smooths the complications into a single line. They opened the tomb, and death followed. Celebrity culture adds another layer. Famous writers, spiritualists, stage magicians, society figures, and self-appointed experts comment on the discovery, often with more confidence than evidence. Some are fascinated by the occult. Others simply know that mystery attracts attention. In the early 20th century, spiritualism has not vanished into the margins. Many people still attend séances, read accounts of psychic phenomena, and wonder whether the dead can communicate with the living. After the mass deaths of the First World War and the influenza pandemic, grief has made the boundary between worlds feel painfully close. In such a climate, the idea of a pharaoh's curse does not seem merely exotic. It touches a larger wound. Millions have already been thinking about death, survival, spirits, and messages from beyond. Tutankhamun gives those thoughts a golden stage. There is also an imperial shadow behind the story. The tomb is discovered in Egypt, but much of the early global attention is filtered through British newspapers, European fascination, and Western control over antiquities discourse. The curse becomes a way of making Egypt mysterious, dangerous, and otherworldly, while often ignoring living Egyptians, local labourers, Egyptian officials, and the political struggle over who has the right to control ancient heritage. The popular tale centres aristocrats, explorers, and the dead king, but the real excavation depends on Egyptian workers whose names are rarely remembered with equal force. This is one of the quieter injustices beneath the legend. The curse gives the dead pharaoh a voice of revenge, but it often leaves the living Egyptians around the discovery strangely voiceless. Rumour also thrives because archaeology itself moves slowly. Careful documentation takes time, conservation takes time, scholarly publication takes time, but newspapers need daily drama. When facts arrive slowly, Speculation fills the empty space. A closed door becomes a secret. A delay becomes suspicious. A death becomes connected. A disagreement becomes scandal. The public does not wait for full excavation reports before forming an emotional understanding of the tomb. By the time evidence is organized, the myth has already traveled farther. Scholars can explain that ancient Egyptian protective texts are more varied and less theatrical than the newspapers suggest. Doctors can explain infection. Statisticians can point out that the death pattern is not extraordinary. But correction rarely moves with the same speed or colour as fear. The curse story is powerful because it flatters the imagination while pretending to punish arrogance. It tells a satisfying moral tale modern intruders disturb ancient sanctity and pay the price. It lets the audience enjoy the treasures while also feeling that the treasures are dangerous. It transforms archaeology into a drama of forbidden knowledge. And in a subtle way, it eases discomfort about excavation itself, instead of asking difficult questions about empire, ownership, scientific disturbance, and the removal of sacred objects. The public can focus on supernatural revenge. The curse becomes a thrilling substitute for an ethical reckoning. Yet beneath the exaggeration, something real remains. The media did not invent the human unease around tombs. It amplified it. It took an ancient concern, the defense of the dead, and dressed it in modern headlines. It turned scattered facts into a narrative because the narrative already lived somewhere in the human mind. The sealed door, the disturbed body, the sudden death, the old warning, the glitter of gold in darkness. These things need very little help to become myth. By the time Tutankhamun's treasures emerge fully into public imagination, the curse has become almost another artifact. Less ancient than the objects themselves, but nearly as influential. It is not found in a shrine or coffin. It is manufactured in ink, rumour, grief, and repetition, and then placed over the tomb like an invisible second seal. The air inside a sealed tomb can feel supernatural before anyone understands what is in it. It is old, still, stale, and intimate with decay. It carries the scent of dust, stone, wood, resin, linen, bat droppings, ancient plaster, dried organic matter, and sometimes the faint chemical sharpness of substances used to preserve the dead. To the first people who enter, it may seem like a breath from another age, and in a poetic sense it is. But air is never only atmosphere. It is also a physical environment, shaped by moisture, microbes, minerals, animal intrusion, and centuries of chemical change. If a tomb can make people sick, the cause does not need to be a pharaoh's anger. The tomb itself may be dangerous enough. This scientific possibility has often been raised around curse legends, especially after the fame of Tutankhamun's tomb. Could ancient sealed chambers contain molds, bacteria, or toxins capable of harming explorers? Could fungal spores grow on organic materials and become airborne when disturbed? Could bat guano, rotting offerings, old wood, or decomposed bodies create hazardous conditions? The answer is cautious rather than dramatic. Yes. Tomb environments can contain biological and chemical risks. Archaeologists, conservators, and workers in old sealed spaces must take such risks seriously. But no single explanation fully accounts for the famous curse stories, because most of those stories were built from scattered deaths, exaggerations, and coincidences rather than a clear medical pattern. Still, the natural dangers are real. Dust is one of the simplest. In a tomb, dust is not clean powder. It can include fragments of plaster, stone, dried organic matter, insect remains, ancient textiles, paint particles, salts, fungi, bacteria, and particles from animal waste. When a chamber is opened after long closure, movement can lift this material into the air. Breathing it may irritate lungs, eyes, and skin. In some cases, spores from fungi can pose risks, especially to people with weakened immune systems or existing respiratory conditions. The evidence remains incomplete for many specific ancient cases, but modern fieldwork has shown again and again that old enclosed environments deserve caution. The danger is not theatrical, but it can be practical and unpleasant. Mould offers another layer. Tombs are often imagined as perfectly dry, especially in Egypt, but not every tomb remains dry forever. Flooding, humidity changes, groundwater, animal activity, and modern visitation can alter the environment. Organic materials inside a tomb wood, linen, food offerings, leather, papyrus, plant matter. Human remains can support microbial life under the right conditions. Some moulds produce allergens or toxins. Others simply damage artifacts. The most serious health effects usually depend on concentration, exposure time, and the vulnerability of the person exposed. This is why the idea of a universal mould curse is too neat. A tomb is not automatically a poison chamber, but a disturbed tomb can release invisible irritants, and invisible irritants are easily transformed by rumour into invisible revenge. There are chemical hazards as well. Ancient preservation materials may include resins, oils, bitumen-like substances, natron residues, pigments, and mineral compounds. Some pigments used in the ancient world can contain toxic elements. Cinnabar, for example, contains mercury sulfide and appears in various ancient ritual and elite contexts outside Egypt as well. Arsenic compounds, lead-based, pigments, and other mineral substances can be hazardous under certain conditions. In tombs across different cultures, especially those with painted walls, preserved bodies, lacquered objects, or treated surfaces, the material world can carry risks that ancient craftspeople did not understand in modern toxicological terms. Scholars still debate the exact exposure levels in many archaeological settings, but the broader point is clear: the tomb's beauty can be chemically complex. Sealed spaces can also suffer from poor oxygen, high carbon dioxide or other gases depending on geology, decomposition, and ventilation. Some underground spaces, caves, crypts, and chambers can become dangerous simply because the air is not fit to breathe. Ancient tomb explorers using candles sometimes learned this in a direct way. A weak flame could signal bad air. Modern teams use instruments, ventilation, masks, and procedures when necessary. Because romantic courage is a poor substitute for breathing safely. This detail strips away some of the glamour from curse legends, but it adds a different kind of awe. The tomb does not need magic to remind the living they are fragile. A pocket of bad air can do that without ceremony. Yet science also has limits. It can identify plausible hazards, test samples, analyze microbes, measure gases, study pigments, and reconstruct environmental conditions. What it cannot honestly do is explain every famous curse death after the fact with a single invisible agent. Lord Carnarvon's death, for example, is better understood through the medical risks of infection in his time than through tomb toxins. Many people who entered or worked near Tutankhamun's tomb did not suffer mysterious early deaths. Others who died had ordinary causes, often years later. The curse narrative gathers them together emotionally, but medicine separates them case by case. What survives in the record suggests no reliable pattern of supernatural or even uniform biological punishment. The more interesting scientific story may be not whether tombs kill, but how tomb environments preserve and transform. A sealed chamber is a slow laboratory. Materials age in darkness. Wood cracks or survives depending on humidity. Linen stiffens. Metals corrode or remain brilliant. Resins darken. Paints fade or hold astonishing colour. Human remains dry. Decay, mineralize, or become mummified depending on conditions. Microorganisms wait, flourish, die back, or awaken when air and moisture change. The moment of opening is not only a discovery, it is an environmental shock. The very act of entering can begin the destruction of what survived precisely because no one entered before. This is one of archaeology's quiet tragedies. A tomb can be safest while hidden and most endangered when found. Light can damage pigments, air can feed decay, visitors can raise humidity, touch can transfer oils, flashy excavation can ruin context, even careful excavation changes the balance. The tomb that seemed frozen in time was never truly frozen, it was stable in its own slow way. Opening it starts a new chemical and biological chapter. The supposed curse may be less a punishment against humans than a warning about disturbance itself. Break the seal, and the past begins to change faster. In that sense, science does not erase the tomb's mystery. It relocates it. The mystery is not whether a mummy sends death through the air like a conscious weapon. The mystery is how fragile survival really is. How many accidents must align for a chamber to remain readable, and how quickly the living can destroy what they came to understand. Dust, mould, gases, toxins, and decay do not make as neat a story as divine revenge, but they carry a colder truth. The dead do not need to rise. The tomb has its own defences written in chemistry, silence, darkness, and time. Egypt gives the modern world its most famous tomb curse, but it does not own the fear. Long before newspapers turned Tutankhamun into a global ghost story, many cultures imagined the disturbed grave as a dangerous place. The landscapes change, the gods change, the funeral customs change, yet the same unease keeps returning in altered form. A grave is not only a deposit of remains, it is a claim, a boundary, a memory fixed in earth. To cross it wrongly is to insult more than one body. It can offend a family, a city, a god, an ancestor, a dynasty, or the invisible order that allows the living to sleep near the dead without constant terror. What survives in the records suggests that tomb protection is one of humanity's recurring languages, spoken in inscriptions, rituals, taboos, stories, and architecture from deserts to river plains to mountain valleys. In Mesopotamia, where cities rise from mud brick and kings write their authority into clay and stone, curses are often direct, formal, and severe. They appear not only in tombs, but in royal inscriptions, foundation deposits, boundary stones, and temple texts. A king who builds, restores, or dedicates something calls on gods to protect the work against future damage. Anyone who alters the inscription, removes the object, erases the name, steals the offering, or claims the work falsely may face divine rage. The punishments can be elaborate loss of kingship, disease, famine, broken lineage, defeat in war, or denial of proper burial. These are not casual threats. They reflect a world in which writing itself can carry authority across generations. To carve a curse is to recruit the gods as witnesses against future hands. Mesopotamian royal tombs and burials vary greatly across time and region, and the evidence remains incomplete. But the broader culture of protected memory is unmistakable. The dead are not always imagined in the same radiant afterlife that Egyptian texts develop. Mesopotamian views of the underworld can be darker, more shadowed, more dependent on offerings from descendants. To be properly buried and remembered matters deeply. A person without offerings may be restless, hungry, or diminished. In such a world, disturbing a grave is not merely theft. It interferes with the continuing relationship between the living and those below, even when the curse is attached to a monument rather than a tomb. The logic is similar. The past has rights, names must endure, and future violators must be frightened before they act. In the Greek world, the fear takes a different tone. Greek graves often stand in visible places, along roads or outside city walls, where the dead can be remembered by passers-by. Many inscriptions speak in the voice of the dead, or ask the traveller to pause, read, and remember. Some warn against disturbing the grave, moving the marker, or burying another body unlawfully in the same place. The language is often less cosmic than Egyptian underworld texts, but it can still carry serious force. The grave belongs to someone. The stone marks a boundary. The body beneath is not public material. Scholars still debate how common specific curse formulas were across different regions and periods, but the pattern is clear enough memory and property meet at the tomb, and violation can call for punishment from gods, law, or community. Rome inherits and expands this concern with the legal identity of the grave. Roman tomb inscriptions can be strikingly practical. They specify who owns the tomb, who may be buried there, who may not, and what penalties may apply if the rules are broken. Some threaten fines payable to civic or religious authorities. Others invoke divine or ancestral consequences. The Roman dead live within a world of law, family status, inheritance, and public display. Tombs line roads leading out of cities, turning the approach to urban life into a corridor of memory. A passerby sees names, careers, relationships, freedmen proudly commemorated, families asserting dignity, soldiers, merchants, children, wives, husbands. The tomb speaks because status survives through being seen, but visibility creates vulnerability, so the inscription must also defend. Do not sell this plot. Do not open this tomb. Do not place an outsider here. Do not steal the stone. This Roman practicality reveals something important about curses beyond Egypt. Not every tomb warning is a mystical thunderbolt. Some are administrative, some are legal, some are social, some are religious. Many are all of these at once. A fine carved onto a tomb may seem less dramatic than a god's wrath, but it belongs to the same human project protecting the dead from future disrespect. The curse is one tool among many, and its tone adapts to the society that uses it. In a bureaucratic culture, the dead may be defended by paperwork. In a temple-centered culture, by gods. In a family-centered burial tradition, by descendants. In most real societies, these defenses overlap. Far to the east, ancient China creates tomb worlds of staggering ambition. The burial complex of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, is the most famous example, though it's only one part of a long tradition of elite tomb building. There, underground space becomes an empire in miniature. Terracotta soldiers stand in formation, officials, acrobats, horses, weapons, and other figures suggest a ruler who intends to carry command into the next realm. Ancient texts describe wonders in the emperor's tomb, including rivers of mercury, though the central burial chamber has not been fully excavated, and caution remains essential when separating textual tradition from archaeological fact. Even without opening the deepest chamber, the surrounding evidence shows that power could be projected beneath the earth on a scale almost difficult to absorb. The tomb is not a resting place alone. It is a continuation of statecraft. Chinese tomb protection often relies less on dramatic written curses of the Egyptian popular type and more on concealment, depth, complex construction, guardian figures, cosmological planning, and sometimes lethal practical defences as described in later sources. The details are debated, and not all accounts can be taken at face value, but the underlying fear is familiar. A ruler's burial contains wealth, ritual power, and political meaning. It must be hidden from robbers, protected from decay, and arranged according to ideas of the cosmos. The dead emperor's authority becomes architectural. The tomb says that the order of the living court continues underground, guarded by soldiers who never tire because they are made of fired clay. Across the ocean, in Mesoamerica, tombs and burials reveal yet another set of relationships between death, power, and sacred space. Maya royal tombs, for example, can be placed within pyramids and temples, binding dynastic ancestors to the ceremonial heart of the city. Burial chambers may contain jade, shell, ceramics, stingray spines, ornaments, offerings, and bodies arranged within a cosmology of rulership and transformation. The tomb of Pakal at Palenque is one of the most famous, with its deep temple setting and rich symbolic program. Modern popular culture has sometimes pulled such images into unsupported theories about aliens or lost technology, but the mainstream evidence points instead to Maya kingship, mythology, dynastic legitimacy, and the sacred geography of the underworld. No single explanation fully accounts for every symbol, and scholars still debate details of interpretation, but the tomb's purpose is not vague. It anchors a ruler within a cosmic and political story. In the Andes, in the Near East, in Europe's burial mounds, in Scythian kurgans, in Thracian tombs, in Etruscan painted chambers, and in countless smaller graves whose builders left no written record, the same pattern repeats in quieter forms. The dead are supplied. The grave is marked or hidden. The body is positioned. Objects are chosen. Boundaries are made. Fear gathers around disturbance. Some cultures emphasize ancestors as protectors. Others fear the restless dead. Others focus on pollution, law, divine anger, or family shame. The outward forms differ, but the grave almost everywhere asks the living to behave. This wide view changes the curse. It becomes less an Egyptian curiosity and more a human reflex. To bury someone carefully is to admit that the dead still have a place among the living. To curse the violator is to defend that place against time, greed, and forgetfulness. The tomb may stand under a pyramid, beneath a road, inside a mound, below a temple stair, or under packed earth in a village cemetery. But the message is strangely constant. The body below is not nothing. The name once mattered. The boundary still speaks. The deeper the story moves into ancient tombs, the clearer it becomes that burial is never only about the dead. A royal tomb is built by the living, paid for by the living, guarded by the living, feared by the living, and used by the living to explain why power should continue. The ruler's body may lie hidden in the chamber, but the tomb's message is aimed outward. It tells subjects, rivals, descendants, priests, enemies, and future kings that this person was not ordinary flesh. This person belonged to an order larger than a single lifetime. The gold, weapons, servants, food, paintings, statues, incense, horses, boats, jewels, masks, seals, and sacred texts are not simply possessions. They are arguments. They insist that rank survives decay, that command can cross into the unseen, and that the structure of the kingdom should remain believable even after the king's heart has stopped. This is the price of eternal power. It consumes resources on a scale that can seem almost impossible when viewed from ordinary life. A farmer may measure wealth in grain, animals, tools, or a roof that survives the rain. A royal burial may gather precious metals, imported stones, rare pigments, carved timber, fine linen, skilled labour, ritual attention, and years of planning. The tomb removes these things from daily use and places them around a dead body in the name of cosmic necessity. To modern eyes, that can look like waste. To the ancient societies that built such tombs, it could look like preservation of the world itself. If the ruler is a link between earth and heaven, if kingship is woven into fertility, war, justice, and divine favour, then the royal dead cannot simply be buried and abandoned. They must be transformed properly, because their failure might symbolise the failure of order. This does not mean everyone believed in the same way or benefited equally. The evidence remains incomplete, and ancient societies were never made of one mind. Some workers may have felt pride in building a monument for eternity. Others may have felt exhaustion, resentment, or nothing more mystical than the need for wages and food. Priests may have believed deeply in the rituals they performed while also gaining status from controlling them. Rulers may have feared death sincerely while also understanding the political value of magnificence. No single explanation fully accounts for the extravagance of elite burial. Faith, propaganda, grief, tradition, competition, and fear all gather in the same chamber. The objects placed in tombs reveal how power imagines itself. Weapons suggest that the ruler remains a warrior or must be protected in the next world. Chariots, horses, boats, or model vehicles suggest movement, conquest, pilgrimage, solar travel, or royal display beyond death. Food and drink make the afterlife bodily and familiar. Jewelry preserves rank against the humiliation of naked decay. Musical instruments, gaming boards, cosmetic vessels, mirrors, carved furniture, and fine clothing suggest that eternity is not only survival, but continued refinement. A king does not wish merely to exist. He wishes to exist as a king. Servants reveal the darker edge of that desire. In some ancient burials, attendants, retainers, concubines, guards, animals, or captives appear to have been killed or buried to accompany the dead ruler. The details vary widely by culture and period, and scholars still debate the exact circumstances behind some mass burials, especially where violence, sacrifice, loyalty, coercion, and ritual overlap. But the meaning is hard to soften. Elite death could demand other deaths. The ruler's afterlife was imagined as requiring service, and the bodies of the less powerful could become part of that equipment. Later societies often replace literal human sacrifice with figurines, models, painted servants, or written spells that make symbolic labour possible. This change is sometimes presented as moral progress, and in practical terms it may have spared lives, but it also shows the persistence of the same assumption power expects to be served forever. Cosmic symbolism turns the tomb from a storage place into a universe. In Egypt, stars on ceilings, solar boats, underworld books, divine guardians, and carefully oriented architecture place the king inside cycles of death and rebirth. In China, the underground army and planned burial landscapes can mirror imperial administration and cosmic geography. In Mesoamerica, rulers buried within temple pyramids become embedded in sacred mountains, underworld journeys, and dynastic legitimacy. In steppe burials, horses, weapons, and ornaments connect elite identity to mobility, warfare, and ancestral prestige. Across these worlds, tombs do not merely contain symbols, they arrange reality as the elite wish it to continue. The chamber becomes a model of the cosmos with the ruler still near its centre. There is a surprising fragility in this display. The more a tomb insists on eternal hierarchy, the more it reveals anxiety about collapse. If power were truly secure, it would not need so much stone. If memory were guaranteed, names would not be carved so deeply. If the dead ruler's status were obvious forever, the tomb would not need gold, guardians, curses, and ritual maintenance. Every magnificent burial is therefore both confident and afraid. It declares triumph over death while admitting that death has already won the first battle. The king's body must be hidden because it is vulnerable. The The king's name must be repeated because it can be forgotten. The king's wealth must be sealed away because others may take it. The king's immortality must be staged because it is not self-evident. The political value of the tomb continues after burial. Descendants can point to ancestral monuments as proof of legitimacy. Priests can maintain cults that bind land, offerings, and offices to the dead ruler's memory. A new dynasty can honour old tombs to claim continuity, or damage them to break it. A conqueror can loot royal graves to humiliate a defeated people. A later ruler can imitate ancient tomb forms to place himself inside a longer sacred tradition, even when the chamber is hidden. The landscape above it may become a map of authority. Tombs cluster where power wants memory to gather. Necropolises become cities of the dead beside cities of the living. And then, eventually, empires fall anyway. The offerings stop, the priests disappear, the language changes, the roads shift, the names become difficult to read, treasure is stolen, bodies are moved, chambers collapse, and sacred geography becomes archaeological terrain. Yet the tomb's political statement does not vanish completely. It changes audience. It no longer persuades subjects to obey a king, but it still persuades modern viewers that the king mattered. Even broken, the tomb works. Even stripped, it preserves the shape of ambition. Even when the curse is no longer feared in the old way, the message remains unmistakable. Someone once tried to build authority strong enough to survive death, and entire communities paid the price of that dream. Once a tomb is opened in the modern world, the old question changes shape. In antiquity, the most feared intruder is the robber, the man who enters in secret and leaves with gold under his cloak. In the age of archaeology, the intruder may arrive with permits, cameras, conservation materials, notebooks, careful gloves, and a sincere desire to preserve knowledge. Yet the tomb does not necessarily know the difference. The seal is still broken. The chamber is still entered. The body is still exposed to light, air, measurement, and interpretation. Objects placed beside the dead for eternity are lifted, numbered, packed, restored, displayed, stored, or transported. The violence is not the same as theft, but the disturbance is real, and modern archaeology has had to spend more than a century reckoning with that uncomfortable truth. Early excavation often moved faster than modern standards would allow. Explorers cut into mounds, cleared chambers, shipped statues and coffins across seas, divided finds between excavators and governments, and sometimes treated human remains less as people than as specimens or curiosities. Some worked carefully by the standards of their time. Others were destructive, impatient, or openly driven by collecting. The evidence remains incomplete in many old excavations because the very methods used to uncover the past erased context that can never be recovered. A necklace removed without recording its position loses part of its meaning. A mummy unwrapped for spectacle loses evidence about wrapping technique, amulet placement, disease, injury, and ritual sequence. A painted chamber exposed without protection begins to deteriorate. Knowledge gained in one form can destroy knowledge in another. The moral problem grows sharper when ancient objects leave the lands where they were buried. Museums around the world contain coffins, grave goods, statues, bones, funerary masks, jars, textiles, and sacred objects removed during periods of empire, colonial pressure, unequal treaties, excavation partage, private purchase, looting, or poorly documented trade. Some collections preserve materials that might otherwise have been lost. Some have supported serious scholarship. Yet preservation does not erase the question of ownership. Who has the right to hold the dead? Is a royal mummy a source of scientific knowledge, a national ancestor, a sacred person, or all of these at once? when a funerary object sits under glass thousands of miles from its tomb? Is it saved from decay or separated from the world that gave it meaning? No single explanation fully accounts for every case, because each object has its own history, but the broader tension is impossible to avoid. Human remains make the issue most intimate. A skull can reveal diet, ancestry, trauma, disease, migration, and age at death. Bones can speak scientifically with extraordinary force. Teeth can preserve childhood stress. Isotopes can hint at where someone grew up. Ancient DNA can reshape entire histories of movement and kinship. But the person being studied did not consent in any modern sense. Their family, if traceable at all, is long gone or transformed into descendant communities with their own claims, values, and griefs. Scholars still debate how to balance research value with respect, especially when remains are connected to living indigenous peoples, colonized communities, or groups whose ancestors were collected without dignity. The dead can teach, but they can also be used. The difference depends on care, context, consultation, and humility. Looting adds another wound. When a tomb is robbed for the art market, the damage is not only the loss of beautiful objects, it is the destruction of relationships between objects, bodies, architecture, soil layers, inscriptions, and placement. A gold cup without its find spot becomes less a historical witness and more a luxury item with a severed memory. A painted coffin sold through a dealer may still be visually stunning, but if its excavation history is unknown, the person it belonged to has been partly erased. Modern demand for antiquities can make ancient cemeteries dangerous again, not because of curses, but because money continues to tempt the living into the houses of the dead. What survives in the record from looted sites often resembles a crime scene after the evidence has been scattered. Archaeology at its best tries to resist this destruction. Modern excavation is slower, more documented, more interdisciplinary, and more aware of conservation than the expeditions of earlier centuries. Teams record layers, photograph positions, scan chambers, analyze residues, stabilize fragile materials, and sometimes choose not to excavate at all if leaving a tomb sealed is the better form of preservation. Remote sensing, ground-penetrating radar, endoscopy, 3D modelling, and non-invasive imaging can reveal hidden spaces without immediate entry. CT scanning can examine mummies without unwrapping them. Chemical analysis can identify substances from tiny samples. These methods do not remove every ethical problem, but they show a shift in attitude. The goal is no longer simply to possess the past, it is to understand it while doing as little harm as possible. Even so, restraint is difficult because discovery has power. A sealed tomb promises headlines, funding, national pride, academic prestige, tourism, and public wonder. Governments may see heritage as identity and economic resource. Scholars may see rare evidence. Local communities may see sacred ground, livelihood, or both. The media may see spectacle. Tourists may see mystery. These interests can align, but they can also collide. A tomb opened for study may become a tourist attraction. And tourism can bring both protection and damage. Visitors create humidity, heat, dust, and pressure for access. Replicas and digital experiences can reduce harm, yet many people still long to stand near the original, as if proximity to the dead makes history more real. There is a quiet irony here. Ancient curses warned against disturbing tombs because the dead required protection. Modern archaeology, after its long and uneven history, has arrived at a similar conclusion by another path, not because every tomb is believed to be supernaturally guarded, but because every tomb is fragile, finite, and morally charged. The dead cannot defend their own context. Once destroyed, it does not return. Once scattered, it can sometimes be studied, sometimes repatriated, sometimes restored, but never made whole in the original way. The curse becomes, in modern terms, a principle of responsibility. This does not mean tombs should never be studied. Without archaeology, much of the human past would remain silent, and the dead themselves would be vulnerable to looters, construction, erosion, and forgetting. The knowledge gained from burials has transformed understanding of disease, migration, craft, family, belief, inequality, violence, and survival. But the right to know is not limitless. It must be weighed against the dignity of those who were buried, the wishes of descendant communities where they exist, the laws of the countries involved, and the long shadow of earlier extraction. The most serious archaeology now carries a kind of reverence that is not so different from fear, though it speaks in a modern language. The moral reckoning, then, is not a rejection of discovery. It is a demand that discovery grow up. The tomb is not a treasure chest, not a stage prop, not a puzzle box built for the satisfaction of the present. It is the remains of a human promise. Someone was placed there with care. Someone believed the chamber mattered. Someone expected that boundary to hold. When modern hands cross it, they inherit not only the objects inside, but the obligation those objects create. The ancient curse threatened punishment for violation. The modern consequence is quieter, but perhaps more lasting if the living treat the dead carelessly. They do not awaken monsters. They reveal something broken in themselves. The curse survives because it does something that facts alone do not always do. It protects memory with fear. A careful report can describe a burial chamber, list the objects, date the pottery, analyze the bones, and explain the inscriptions. But a curse story makes people hesitate before the door. It turns a grave from a fine spot into a moral presence. Even when the supernatural claim is doubtful, even when the supposed punishment has been exaggerated. The myth carries a warning that is older than archaeology and more stubborn than skepticism. The dead should not be treated casually. They were loved, feared, honoured, used, displayed, hidden, and remembered by people who believed the boundary mattered. A curse may not prove that spirits strike down intruders, but it does prove that human beings have long needed language strong enough to defend those who can no longer defend themselves. This is why curse stories often gather around disturbed graves, even in cultures where the original warning is faint, lost, or misunderstood. The human imagination fills the silence. A mound opened after centuries becomes unlucky. A coffin removed from a church floor carries whispers. A mummy taken from a desert tomb seems to bring misfortune to its owner. A carved figure in a museum appears watchful. A skull on a collector's shelf becomes the centre of household unease. The evidence remains incomplete for most of these tales, and many collapse under close examination. But the emotional pattern is consistent. People sense that something has been displaced. The myth gives that discomfort a shape. At the centre of the feeling is grief. A tomb is made because someone could not simply vanish. The living took time, labour, and resources to mark the passage from breath to silence. Even the grandest royal burial, for all its politics, begins with the fact of a body that must be handled. Even the richest grave goods circle around absence. When later intruders open the tomb, they do not only encounter an ancient belief system, they step into the remains of mourning. The curse says, in its harshest form, that grief has teeth. It refuses to let the dead become neutral. It insists that a body once belonged to a network of care, duty, fear, and memory. Ownership is another force beneath the myth. Modern law can argue over states, museums, descendants, excavation rights, and cultural patrimony, but ancient curse stories speak in a more elemental register. This is mine. This is ours. This belongs to the dead. Do not take it. The claim may come from a king, a family, a priesthood, a community, or an imagined ancestral presence. It may defend sacred dignity, but it may also defend wealth and hierarchy. No single explanation fully accounts for every curse, because ownership around tombs has always been tangled. A royal tomb may preserve collective identity, while also hoarding the labour of thousands around one elite body. A family grave may express love while also asserting land rights. A sacred burial may be both spiritual centre and political claim. Myth protects memory, but memory itself is never free from power. Still, the protective function matters. In many places, stories of haunted tombs, angry ancestors, or cursed objects may have discouraged casual disturbance. Fear can preserve what law cannot reach. A remote grave may survive because local people avoid it. A mound may remain unploughed because it is associated with spirits. A cave burial may be left alone because children are warned not to go near it after dark. Scholars still debate how often folklore directly protected archaeological sites. But there are cases across the world where taboo, ritual avoidance, or sacred association help keep places intact. To dismiss every such belief as superstition is to miss its practical wisdom. The story may be false in a literal sense and useful in a cultural one. The curse also protects against a subtler danger in difference. Treasure hunters are dangerous because they want too much from a tomb, but indifference is dangerous because it wants nothing at all. It lets bones be bulldozed, markers be reused, names be forgotten, and burial places become convenient ground. A frightening story can keep attention fixed where ordinary respect might fade. It makes the place memorable. People repeat the tale, and in repeating it, they preserve the knowledge that something lies there. The myth becomes a rough archive, distorted but persistent. What survives in the record suggests that many ancient places remained meaningful not only through written history, but through local stories that carried fragments of memory long after the original names were lost. This does not mean all myths should be accepted without question. Curse stories can mislead. They can erase real people behind exotic fantasy. They can turn complex cultures into scenery for horror. They can encourage sensationalism, racial stereotypes, colonial adventure, and the idea that ancient societies are mysterious because they are irrational. The famous tomb curse, especially in its modern form, often says more about 20th century media and Western fascination than about Egyptian religion itself. It can distract from archaeology, ethics, labour, and historical context. It can make the dead entertaining rather than respected. That is the danger of myth when it becomes spectacle. But myth can also hold a truth that needs careful translation. The truth is not necessarily that a god kills the intruder. The truth may be that violation has consequences. Remove an object from its chamber, and meaning is damaged. Display a body without dignity, and the living are diminished. Sell a funerary mask without provenance, and a person's story is severed. Treat ancestors as curiosities, and the past becomes a marketplace of fragments. The curse gives moral weight to actions that might otherwise be excused as curiosity, profit, or progress. It says that the dead are not raw material. There is something deeply human in that insistence. People fear being forgotten almost as much as they fear dying. They carve names, build tombs, save letters, preserve photographs, tell family stories, and visit graves because memory feels like a second life. Ancient tomb curses belong to this same impulse, only sharpened by the sacred imagination of their worlds. They reach forward toward unknown hands and demand recognition. They do not know the archaeologist, the tourist, the looter, the museum visitor, or the viewer staring through a screen thousands of years later. Yet they speak to all of them in one way or another. Remember that this was a person. Remember that this was a boundary. Remember that knowledge without reverence can become another form of theft. So the myth protects memory by making trespass emotionally expensive. It wraps the tomb in dread. But beneath the dread is a plea. Do not reduce the dead to gold. Do not reduce the grave to a puzzle. Do not mistake silence for permission. The ancient curse may not strike like lightning, but it continues to work whenever it makes the living pause, lower their voice, and feel, even briefly, that the darkness ahead is not empty. It is occupied by the remains of someone's hope to endure. For all their warnings, all their sealed doors, all their fear of violation, ancient tombs have become some of the most generous witnesses the past has left behind. Cities are rebuilt until their oldest layers vanish beneath later streets. Palaces are stripped for stone. Wooden houses rot. Cloth decays. Songs disappear the moment no one sings them. But a tomb, if it remains protected by dryness, darkness, accident, or neglect, can hold a human world in suspension. It does not preserve life exactly, because nothing can do that. But it preserves the arrangement of things around life, the bowl near the hand, the sandals placed for a journey, the beadwork sewn to cloth, the tools of a craft, the mark of disease on bone, the pollen caught in a garland, the last meal sealed in a vessel, the painted servant who still carries bread toward a master who's not eaten in 3,000 years. This is the strange gift of the tomb. It was built to keep the dead apart from time, yet it allows time to be studied with uncommon intimacy. A monument above ground may tell us what rulers wanted everyone to believe. A tomb can tell us what they feared, what they valued, how they imagined the body, what materials they could command, how far their trade routes reached, what foods marked status, what diseases travelled through their families, and how carefully hands worked in the service of eternity. What survives in the record suggests that burial evidence often reveals not only death, but the full pressure of life before death. The dead body becomes a page written by labour, diet, violence, genetics, environment, and age. Bones are among the quietest and most direct witnesses. They can show healed fractures, arthritis, infection, malnutrition, dental wear, childhood stress, and the marks of repetitive work. A skeleton may reveal that a person carried heavy loads for years, knelt often, rode horses, ground grain, fought with weapons, survived injury, or suffered from disease that left visible traces. Teeth can preserve clues from childhood long after the rest of the body has changed. Enamel defects may suggest periods of stress while a person was growing. Heavy toothwear can point toward gritty flour, certain food habits, or the use of teeth as tools. Isotopes in teeth and bones can suggest what kinds of food people ate, and sometimes where they lived during different stages of life. The evidence remains incomplete and must be interpreted carefully, but it allows the past to become biological rather than merely architectural. Tombs also expose inequality in the body itself. Elite burials may contain gold, fine linen, imported stones, and rich food offerings. But the bodies inside do not always show perfect health. Royal families can suffer from inherited disorders, infection, injury, dental disease, and the consequences of restricted marriage patterns. Ordinary people may show the burdens of labour more plainly, with worn joints, compressed spines, or signs of nutritional stress. Yet poverty is not always simple to read, and wealth does not guarantee comfort. Scholars still debate many individual diagnoses, especially in famous mummies where the desire for a dramatic conclusion can outrun the evidence. Still, the larger pattern is clear. Tombs remind us that status shapes life, but biology has its own blunt authority. Food offerings create another kind of time capsule. Grain, bread, beer residues, wine jars, dried fruit, meat, fish, honey, oils, spices, and seeds can survive in certain conditions, allowing researchers to reconstruct ancient diets and rituals. Sometimes the offerings are symbolic, sometimes practical, often both. A jar in a tomb may speak of trade, agriculture, taste, wealth, and belief at once. Residue analysis can identify oils, resins, fermented drinks, or plant compounds that no inscription bothers to describe. A surprising detail is that the smallest remains can be among the most revealing. Pollen grains, charred seeds, insect fragments, and microscopic starches may tell us what plants were present, what season a burial may have occurred, or what substances were placed near the dead. The grand gold object catches the eye, but the dust in a jar may carry the deeper evidence. Craft survives beautifully in tombs because many funerary objects were made with extraordinary care. Coffins, masks, amulets, textiles, ceramics, weapons, ornaments, and painted panels reveal hands trained across generations. The tomb preserves technical knowledge joinery, weaving, metalworking, pigment preparation, bead drilling, stone carving, glass making, lacquer, gilding, and the chemistry of preservation. A single necklace may show trade routes stretching across deserts and seas. A pigment may reveal access to distant minerals. A wooden coffin may carry timber from a region far from the burial place. These objects do not only say that the dead person was wealthy, they reveal systems of extraction, transport, apprenticeship, taxation, taste, and ritual demand. Behind each beautiful item stands an invisible crowd of miners, sailors, potters, scribes, carpenters, painters, polishers, and labourers. Tombs also preserve belief in forms more intimate than temples. Public temples display official religion, but burial chambers often show religion applied to one person's fate. The afterlife becomes personal there. A spell is placed near a body, an amulet rests over a heart, a figurine promises labour in the next world, a painted road leads through dangers, a guardian waits at a doorway, a bowl of food sits near the dead because someone, at some level, believes provision matters. No single explanation fully accounts for every funerary object, because symbols shift across time, and practical, emotional, magical, and political meanings often overlap. But the tomb lets us see belief not as an abstract system, but as an arrangement of things close to a human body. Even daily life enters the chamber: combs, sandals, cosmetics, gaming pieces, needles, lamps, writing tools, baskets, toys, stools, musical instruments, and cooking vessels can appear among the dead. These objects collapse the distance between ancient people and the present. A ruler may be wrapped in gold, but nearby there may be a worn object shaped by ordinary use. A child's burial may contain small ornaments that speak more softly than any royal inscription. A craftsman's grave may hold tools that suggest identity continued through work. A woman's burial may preserve textile equipment, jewellery, or household objects that reflect both social role and personal status, though interpretation must remain cautious because grave goods do not always map neatly onto life. This is why the tomb is more than a place of fear. It is one of history's most complex archives. It contains the official and the private, the sacred and the practical, the beautiful and the damaged. It preserves what people wanted eternity to see, and also what they accidentally left behind. The curse may warn the living away, but the time capsule draws them closer. Between those two forces, modern understanding is made. Every careful excavation asks how to learn without reducing the dead to evidence alone. Every object lifted from the dust carries both information and loss. The tomb gives knowledge because its silence was broken, and that knowledge is precious precisely because the breaking cannot be undone. At the end of the long passage through sealed doors, painted walls, stolen gold, newspaper legends, scientific caution, and moral reckoning, the curse of ancient tombs begins to look different from the story most people first imagine. It is not only a deadly spell waiting in the dust. It is not only a superstition carved by frightened priests or exaggerated by modern headlines. It is the shadow cast by a bargain that human beings have tried to make with time. Build strongly enough, wrap carefully enough, write deeply enough, threaten fiercely enough, and perhaps the dead will not disappear. Perhaps the name will remain. Perhaps the body will endure. Perhaps the future will behave with respect. Perhaps stone can force memory to last longer than grief. But every tomb proves how uncertain that bargain is. The moment a burial is made, the struggle begins. Decay starts working quietly. Insects, moisture, salts, heat, roots, floods, earthquakes, and pressure begin their patient negotiations with the chamber. Political order changes above ground. Languages shift. Families die out. Priests stop coming. Temples lose income. Roads move. New people settle near old cemeteries and no longer know which hill is sacred. Then come the thieves. Sometimes in the first generation, sometimes centuries later, drawn by the very offerings meant to protect the dead. Then come collectors, soldiers, quarrymen, farmers, builders, tourists, scholars, conservators, and cameras. The tomb is designed for stillness, but history is movement. This is why immortality through burial is always unfinished. No matter how complete the chamber appears on the day it is sealed, it depends on conditions no one can control. A king may command artists to paint the night sky above his sarcophagus, but he cannot command the cliff not to crack. A noble may pay priests to recite offerings forever, but he cannot guarantee that his descendants will remain powerful. A family may carve a warning into stone, but it cannot know whether future strangers will read the language, fear the gods, or care about the name. The evidence remains incomplete for countless tombs because failure is often silent. The graves that vanished without record may outnumber the graves that survive beyond measure. And yet, the attempt itself is moving. Ancient tombs can seem arrogant when they surround one body with wealth, but they can also seem heartbreakingly human. Beneath the gold and ideology lies the same refusal that appears in the smallest marked grave. This person was here. Do not let them dissolve completely. A tomb is a protest against the ordinary cruelty of time. It takes a moment of loss and turns it into architecture. It tries to give shape to absence. It says that a body deserves a place, that memory deserves labour, that death should not be allowed to scatter everything at once. Scholars still debate many details of ancient belief, but the emotional foundation is not difficult to recognise. People feared oblivion, and they built against it. The curse is the hard edge of that fear. If the tomb is a plea, the curse is the plea sharpened into a weapon. It does not merely ask future people to remember, it threatens them for failing to respect remembrance. This makes it morally complicated. Some curses defend genuine grief and sacred dignity. Others defend elite privilege, hoarded wealth, dynastic propaganda, and systems in which the poor built immortality for the powerful. No single explanation fully accounts for all tomb curses because tombs themselves are never simple. They are places where love, fear, authority, Inequality, religion, art, and politics are sealed together in the same darkness. So what is the real curse? It may not be the death of an explorer or the fever of a patron. It may not be mould in the lungs, bad air in a chamber, or a coincidence dressed in gold. Those things belong to parts of the story, but they do not contain the whole of it. The deeper curse is that the desire to escape oblivion often creates new forms of disturbance. The dead are buried with treasures to secure eternity, and the treasures attract robbery. The body is preserved so identity can endure, and the preserved body becomes an object of curiosity. The name is carved to survive, and later rulers erase it to attack that survival. The tomb is hidden for protection, and when found, its secrecy makes it irresistible. The very tools of immortality summon the living back to the door. There is a tragic symmetry in this. The dead need the living to remember them, but the living endanger them by remembering too aggressively. Forgetting destroys the tomb through neglect. Attention destroys it through entry. Somewhere between those dangers lies the fragile path of respect, and every generation has to find it again. Modern archaeology, at its best, tries to walk that path by recording carefully, conserving patiently, consulting where it should, and accepting that not every sealed space must be opened immediately. But even the most careful study cannot fully escape the contradiction. To know the tomb, one must alter it. To preserve the story, one must disturb the silence. Ancient people understood part of this, even if they framed it differently. Their curses speak because they knew the living could not be trusted completely. They knew that greed might defeat reverence, that power might rewrite memory, that hunger might crawl through a broken passage, that future hands might treat sacred objects as prizes. They also knew, perhaps more deeply than modern people sometimes admit, that death is social. A person does not vanish only when the body fails. A person vanishes when the name is no longer spoken, when the grave is no longer known, when the objects lose their story, when the living stop feeling any obligation to the one who has gone. That is why tombs still hold such force. They are not only about ancient beliefs. They are mirrors held up to the present. They ask what the living owe the dead, what knowledge is worth, what respect requires, who owns the past, and whether memory can ever be separated from power. The curse remains because these questions remain. It survives in headlines, in museum debates, in repatriation claims, in conservation labs, in whispered tourist tales, and in the quiet pause before a sealed chamber is opened. The supernatural curse may fade under scrutiny, but the moral one does not. The dead continue to test the living, not by striking them down, but by revealing how they behave when no one from the ancient world is left to object. And perhaps that is the final price of immortality. To be remembered is to lose control over what memory becomes. The pharaoh becomes a mask on a poster. The emperor becomes an army of clay. The noble becomes a catalogue entry. The child becomes a case study. The unknown body becomes data, symbol, ancestor, exhibit, warning, or wonder. The tomb succeeds by carrying the dead into the future, but the future is never the one they imagined. It arrives with new languages, new laws, new hungers, and new lights held up against the old darkness. The curse waits there, not as a monster in the chamber, but as a question carved into the human conscience when the door opens. Will the living take, or will they remember? The tomb grows quiet again in the mind. Though it is never truly as it was, the door has opened, the dust has lifted, the old air has mixed with the breath of the living. Somewhere, a painted figure still faces a wall of darkness. Somewhere, a name cut into stone waits for a reader who may not know how to pronounce it. Somewhere, beneath sand, soil, roots, rubble, or a city street. Another chamber remains closed, holding its silence not because it has defeated time, but because time has not yet found the right hand to break it. The curse of ancient tombs lingers because it belongs to more than one age. It belongs to the priests who carved warnings into sacred walls, to the kings who feared being forgotten, to the workers who carried stone and timber for another person's eternity, to the thieves who entered with shaking hands, to the archaeologists who learned that discovery is never innocent, and to every later generation that stands before the dead and feels the strange pull of curiosity and restraint. It's easy to laugh at the old fear of curses, but harder to laugh inside a burial chamber, where every object seems to have waited too long and every silence feels deliberate. What remains is not proof that the dead take revenge in the way legends say. The world is usually quieter than that, and more complicated. The real warning is slower. It says that memory is fragile, that reverence can become possession, that knowledge can become appetite, and that the past is not empty simply because its people no longer speak. A tomb is never just stone around bones. It is the final shape of someone's hope. It is a hand reaching across centuries, asking not to be reduced to treasure, data, or spectacle. And so the image that stays is not a curse striking from the dark, but a doorway half open in the earth. Beyond it lies a room prepared for eternity, filled with objects chosen by hands that believed the future could be controlled. Outside it stands the living world, restless, bright, impatient, and mortal. Between them is the thin line every tomb tries to defend. To cross it well requires more than courage. It requires humility. Long after the lamps are lowered and the last footsteps fade from the passage, the dead remain where they have always been, at the edge of memory, asking the same quiet price from everyone who enters. Look carefully, take nothing lightly, and remember that even dust was once a life.